with many Bahrainis.
They were objecting to Al Jazeera, particularly to Al Jazeera, on the grounds in Bahrain that they thought that the king or the crown prince had somehow bought off the satellite channel, and thus they were getting less coverage than they, for example, Libya got or Egypt got. I actually explained that, you know, Egypt was a much bigger and more important country, and Libya was turning into a civil war. It didn't, in terms of news value, match what was comparatively little violence, comparatively only, in Bahrain.
The power struggles across North Africa pit popular protest movements against long-time undemocratic leaders, all of whom have used the media means at their disposal, state-run TV, to try to talk, lecture, and sometimes shout their way out of political trouble.
These leaders in the Arab world, remember, this ties back to the theory of the Za'im. The Za'im is the leader. And when a leader goes on TV, part of what he's trying to achieve is that to use media to drive his points as the larger-than-life figure. And the one who set up the standards for this is none other than Jamal Abdel Nasser, who through his speeches in the 50s and the 60s was able to galvanize millions across the Arab world. The problem is that at the time, Jamal Abdel Nasser still had credibility to back up his speeches. And the real disconnect here in reality is that Barak, Ben Ali before him, and now Gaddafi do not understand the disconnect. That's how disconnected these people are from their people.
Because the medium is not the message, not anymore, especially when it's state-controlled. The media are the message, and the messengers are everywhere. Our Global Village Voices now on Libya and the role media, old and new, play in that developing story.
Widespread images of the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt have inspired people throughout the Arab world to rise up for the same thing. But that doesn't detract from the core roots of these revolutions, and that is people are simply fed up with their autocratic rulers, the lack of freedoms, and lack of economic opportunities. Mass media is simply conveying those sentiments and can't be held responsible for the incompetence, corruption, and autocracy of the Arab regimes.
Libya's been tough to follow because of the lack of international media, but I think it's also helped show the value of all the different kinds of media that we have. From the first-person YouTube and Twitter accounts of Libyans to the Twitter accounts of big media companies, and then you still have the traditional news story, which isn't as precise as it normally is because of that lack of access, but it still gives a lot of details you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else.
I think that the recent events in Libya has demonstrated once more that state media in this part of the world are as out of touch and resistant to adapt to reality as the regimes they serve. Because Gaddafi has an iron grip on the state media, he and his son viewed the coverage of the uprising by foreign media channels as an act of hostility from those foreign states.
If you've got a beef with the global news media and you'd like your opinion heard as one of our Global Village Voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who already follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They go to those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us via email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Turning now to Listening Post News Bites. Hungary has promised to water down its contentious new media law, and while the amendments are popular with the European Commission, there are more changes being demanded in Hungary itself. The law went into effect January 1st and drew thousands of protesters onto the streets of Budapest. They said the new media watchdog body had far too much power. The fines that media companies were subject to, as high as €1 million, were disproportionate, and it all felt a bit like a throwback to Hungary's communist past. Coincidentally, Hungary took over the rotating EU presidency the day the law took effect, which caused some degree of embarrassment in Brussels. The amendments to the law reportedly address, amongst other things, the question of disproportionate fines, which the EU is saying helps make the law compatible with EU laws and standards. Critics in Hungary, though, say they're still concerned about the newly created media watchdog body. They say it remains dominated by supporters of the government. A prominent online activist from Bahrain has been released from jail. Ali Abdul Imam founded an online discussion forum called Bahrain Online back in 1999. Abdul Imam quickly rose to become one of Bahrain's top bloggers, recognized as a voice who used the internet to push for political reforms. But the content did not go down well with the Bahraini authorities. They blocked the site in that country. Abdul Imam was arrested back in September, long before the protests started there, and accused of publishing what the regime said was false news on his site. His trial sparked criticism around the world, with support from groups like Human Rights Watch, and it prompted an internet campaign to free him. You may remember a piece that we did last June on Michael Hastings. He's the reporter whose magazine profile of General Stanley McChrystal ended up costing the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan his job. The reporter had up-close and personal access to McChrystal and published the general's scornful comments about the Obama administration's approach to the Afghan war.
Today I accepted General Stanley McChrystal's resignation.
Obama ended up demanding McChrystal's resignation for undermining civilian control of the U.S. military.
You think you know America.
Another story that we looked at last year that ended up winning a Polk Award, the Washington Post series, Top Secret America. The series was 2 years in the making and revealed the scope of the expanding security and intelligence apparatus in the U.S. in the post-9/11 era. When Rupert Murdoch erected a paywall around his Times of London newspaper's website, he hoped that other newspapers would follow suit. Well, he'll be happy with this development. The Telegraph Media Group, which publishes the UK's Daily Telegraph, is reportedly preparing to announce that starting in September, it will begin charging for some of its digital content. Word is the Telegraph is not looking at a full paywall like the Times is. Its approach will resemble that of the New York Times, which allows free access to a certain number of stories before asking readers to start paying. Murdoch, the world's biggest media tycoon, has long maintained that newspapers can no longer afford to allow free access to their sites, but figures released in November suggest that since going behind its paywall, the Times' website is down 4 million viewers a month. That's a drop of about 62%. We recently reported on how money problems had caused the closure of the Irrawaddy magazine, a publication that offered critical reporting on Myanmar from its base in Thailand. Now, another exiled news outlet, an independent TV and radio station, is in similar trouble. The Democratic Voice of Burma, better known as DVB, broadcasts via satellite into Myanmar from Oslo, Norway. It's run by a network of Burmese expatriates and offers the kind of uncensored reporting that's banned by the military regime on its domestic news channels. But according to DVB's deputy manager, that could be about to change. Kin Mong Win has revealed that the organization has seen a drop of about $1 million in funding since Myanmar's elections last year, and as a result, the group has been forced to slash some of its programming, and some of its staff look set to lose their jobs. Jacob Zuma is a satirist's delight, a cartoonist's dream. The South African president provides plenty of fodder and keeps Jonathan Shapiro on his toes. Shapiro, or Zapiro, as he's known professionally, is the country's most provocative political cartoonist. He has been since the days of apartheid. Recently, Zapiro has taken his satirical wit from print to video, or at least he's tried, but he can't find a television channel to air his show. The content's been deemed a bit too edgy by broadcasters in South Africa's relatively young democracy. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead caught up with Zapiro recently in Cape Town to talk to him about his cartoons, his new show, and Zapiro's looming legal showdown with the country's president.
Jonathan Shapiro didn't start out as an editorial cartoonist. It was South Africa's infamous past that led him there.
The apartheid regime was so oppressive that I had to do something about it. I became an activist in 1983, and gradually my activism and my cartooning kind of fused into one thing.
Something the country needed, a white voice in the media, unafraid of the authorities. But even in the new South Africa, Zapiro is still a thorn in the government's side.
Things have changed enormously since the old days. We knew our enemy then. It was easy to be concerted in your fight against an oppressive and evil regime. The difficulties in the democratic era are that things are a lot less easy to pin down. It's also been hard for me to criticize people who I know, who I've been on the same side as for a long time. But I think I managed to, as I often say, beat the politically correct stuffing out of myself.
He did that and more with this cartoon. It showed incumbent President Jacob Zuma preparing to rape Lady Justice. Zapiro called it a metaphor for the abuse of justice that allowed Mr. Zuma to take office. But there was a little bit more to it than that.
Our sitting president was acquitted of rape charges under very controversial circumstances. A lot of people, myself included, were not very impressed with that verdict.
People within the ANC, including Zuma himself and a number of others who were saying that I was unfair to portray him as a rapist after he'd been acquitted. I am saying it is clearly metaphorical because the figure of Lady Justice is a metaphor.
But be that as it may, it is sailing very close to the wind for that very reason.
Mr. Zuma then sued Zapira, which led to this on-air skirmish.
I am doing exactly what journalists and what cartoonists and what satirists do in democratic societies.
And I thought, well, I'll ambush him a little bit because, you know, he is suing me. And unfortunately, I got cut off when he made a statement which I thought was just grandstanding.
You are invading my own dignity.
But at least I got my say in, and a lot of people heard.
Now, more than 2 years later, Zapira has finally been issued with a court summons for the Lady Justice cartoon.
I hope it goes to courts in 2011 because I can't wait to see the president of the country having to explain how the cartoon that Jonathan did was irrelevant to what he had done before he became president of the country.
This whole case against Shapiro could set a very unfortunate precedent. You know, it will be satirists now, tomorrow it will be journalists, the next day it will be particular analysts, on and on and on. We're coming from this country where in the 80s people used to get the newspapers with big holes in them because the state felt that it was not in the public interest. We don't want to go back there.
Here's another technique Mr. Zuma doesn't like. Zapira attaches a shower head to the president's head. It dates back to his rape trial when he admitted to having unprotected sex with an HIV-positive woman. To reduce the risk of infection, Zuma said he just took a shower.
This is a very strange statement from someone who had been the head of the National AIDS Council in South Africa. So I did a cartoon where the shower appeared on his head, and it actually said AIDS prevention.
For the next 3 years, every cartoon that featured Zuma featured the shower head. That changed in mid-2009, but only temporarily.
When he became president, I thought, well, let me give him a chance. And I did a cartoon where his critics are giving him a break and the shower's now suspended. So the shower just sort of lifted up and hovered in the air. When it was found that he had even more babies out of wedlock, he's married to 3 women, but